Part 7. A Scandal in Bohemia. While living in London, I would occasionally come into contact with some of the great people of that city. The Holmes family was an old one, and the people of London would regularly come to them for help, great and small alike. While I stayed in the home of said family, I came to notice that people who required a good deal of work would be sent to Sherlock Holmes, while those who simply needed a logical answer that they could not see went to Mycroft. Mycroft Holmes was a man to whom energy came in very small amounts. Meanwhile, his brother and sister practically burst with the energy that their bodies were so filled with. This became a problem for me. As you can imagine, a household of that age and standing held quite a lot of family wealth. Mycroft Holmes himself was invested in several overseas accounts, which I only knew due to the ramblings of my uncle. As Mr. Mycroft Holmes was a man of extreme logic, he saw the war coming early on, and advised his family to prepare. This included purchasing enough non-perishable items to fuel their hobbies indefinitely, and the hobby of the two younger siblings was fashion, particularly women's fashion. Mary, who had a steadily growing pregnant belly, was unable to model at this point, and even if she had been able to, she herself still needed a model for her personal projects. Thus I was coerced into this role. You might ask why, if I hated it so, I would consent to such treatment in the first place. Well, the answer is that Mary was simultaneously pushy and sweet. You couldn't get angry at her overbearing nature because of how much sweet nonsense followed it. Her brother was her partner in crime. Rather, because I modeled for her, I would obviously model for him as well. He, I will admit, was the more annoying of the two. With the surplus of fabric at their disposal, they contrived together to make me a wardrobe. They even got Mrs. Hudson in on the plan, who, while sympathetic to my plight, played along. Together they assembled several more of the skirts that Holmes had initially made me, and several nice blouses to go with them. They also did one thing which initially annoyed me, but I eventually forgave. Wearing all these clothes that I had become unaccustomed to was frustrating, but I usually wore my white coat over it all, which hid my poor physique. Dr. Jonathan Wells, Mary's husband, had been sympathetic to my plight and gave me one to help restore some of my missing dignity. I typically wore it every day, but one day, after I had been deemed safe to bathe and dress myself, it went missing. Knowing that it was either Mary or Holmes who took it, I set out to the household sewing room. When I arrived, I found Holmes diligently hand-sewing some small garment, though what exactly it was, I didn't know. "Where is it?" My tone was laced with annoyance at having my preferred garment go missing. Holmes didn't look up or stop his handwork. "On the form." I glanced to the back of the room, having neglected to do so upon entry, and saw the coat there on the form as promised, but it looked different, smaller. "You took it in?" Holmes nodded and continued to work. I blinked, confused. Surely I hadn't lost that much weight. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw the same size of woman I always had. Certainly, the coat had been a bit loose on me, but as I approached the form, I saw clearly how drastically it had been taken in. Could they have made a mistake? It seemed possible, but they had taken my measurements much too thoroughly for such a mistake to be likely. I lifted the coat off of the form and attempted to put it on. I say attempted because now that the coat had been fitted to my exact measurements, I could no longer put it on myself. A plight familiar to any who have made the attempt with sufficiently sore muscles. I struggled for a moment before Holmes sighed and put down his work. "If you need help, you should ask." I flushed in frustration. Can the great detective not observe that someone in my state of health would need help with a fitted coat? I was now even more annoyed than before. Holmes smiled wryly as he took the coat from me. "Do turn around, doctor, and of course I knew that you would need assistance." "Then why would you—" I had cut him off, but paused at his warning glance. He slid the coat up my arms and onto my shoulders. "You, good doctor, are the kind of person who would rather chew your own leg out of a bear trap than ask for help. Common and unfortunate trait in doctors. If you are going to be assisting me, then I need you to be able to ask for help when you need it. I left you alone with the coat as a test. You failed." Embarrassed, I flushed. I didn't need to ask him how he was so certain I was a stubborn woman. It was obvious from my interactions with the household. When I wasn't copying documents for the Red Cross office, I was assisting Wells with the various patients that came to him. He had even allowed me on a house call to assist him in setting a man's broken leg. All things I probably should not have been doing. While it was easy to hide my still weakened state from Wells, Mary, and Mrs. Hudson, both of the men who shared the Holmes name knew far better and made it obvious. On one occasion, when pain was racking my body while assisting Wells, my shoulder had begun to twitch. Mycroft Holmes, who was still speaking with the agent Wells was assisting, had laid a hand on my shoulder to ease the spasm which went unnoticed by the other two men. On another day I was being plagued by memories of the battlefield and had kept to the garden. I liked to be in the garden when I could feel those memories begin to bother me. The fresh air helped. I had made my way out only to find Holmes with an umbrella. It had been raining, and while I was unbothered by it, he simply handed it to me and walked on. "I really don't see how striving to be independent is such a bad thing." My tone was low and undefined as I buttoned the coat, which fit me far better. "It wouldn't be if you weren't attempting independence to your own detriment." Holmes returned to his work. "What exactly did your parents do to make you this way?" I froze. "How did you—" Holmes rolled his eyes. "Surely you have spent enough time with me to at least be unsurprised, Watson." I stared at him questioningly, and he rolled his shoulders. "Oh, very well. The conclusion that most would draw is that you gained your stubbornness in college. After all, that is where most doctors get it, and initially this was my impression. When I saw you work with Wells, I realized that wasn't the case." My hands began to shake. "What about my work with Wells makes that not a logical conclusion?" Holmes looked back down and began to sew again. "Your deference." I blinked in confusion. "My what?" "Your deference, Watson. You were too agreeable. One might think of this as a bad trait in a doctor, but it is not. You suggested things to him and predicted what he needed before he had to ask you. That is, you saw what needed to be done and did it, no questions asked." My brow furrowed. "How does that—" "Do let me finish, Watson, or we are going to be here all day." He looked me over like a schoolteacher would an unruly pupil, and with a rueful expression I quieted. "Good girl. Anyway, as I was saying, you showed no signs of stubbornness while attending to patients and deferred to Wells even when you obviously disagreed with him. This all likely results from your training on the front. Now, if, as one would be led to believe, given the general bedside manner of most doctors, you had indeed learned this stubbornness in medical school, your time on the front should have rid you of it entirely. It didn't. You remained stubborn only in regards to your own health and domestic duties. This leads to the conclusion that you must have become independent at a young age, very likely before college. Do you follow?" In my shaken state, all I could do was nod. Normally, had any other person given me praise for being obedient, as Holmes just did, they would have gotten an earful. However, I was too busy being floored by his retelling of my more recent life story. I had known that Holmes' powers of deduction were strong, and had even seen them at work recently, but this display was far beyond my expectations. Here he was, telling me exactly why I was stubbornly independent, with clear observations of a life he had never witnessed, and he wasn't missing anything. I considered the possibility that staying with your uncle could have made you so, but a quick consultation of my brother disproved that. Apparently he enjoyed spoiling you, even getting you a tutor so you could start off for college at 16 years of age. Given that he put you up in a rented house with a nanny of sorts, it is unlikely that he expected any sort of independence until after you graduated. Thus we rule out your uncle and have to dig deeper, making the answer obvious. Your parents are the reason you are fiercely independent. Tell me, did your mother foist her duties upon you at a young age?" I held my tongue. I did not, and would not, talk of my parents' peculiarities in raising their children. They were not very different from the choices of their peers, after all. If Mr. Sherlock Holmes wanted to know their ideas, he could take a boat to the States and ask them himself. "Don't be like that, Watson," Holmes cooed in a manner that seemed more deliberately irritating than soothing. "I was merely asking about your childhood. Should a friend not do so?" "I don't believe we are friends, exactly." I was seething, wishing I were anywhere but there at that particular moment. Holmes' gray eyes sparkled with amusement, and it only served to annoy me further. "And what do you consider us to be, then?" He was baiting me, and I knew it, but his words did serve to distract me from some less than pleasant memories this interaction was causing to surface. I took a deep breath to calm my heart, and thought over the past few weeks. Teacher and student came to mind, but I wasn't about to tell him that. I was willing to admit that his work fascinated me, and I did want to learn more, but without admitting my inferior position. "Colleagues, I suppose. Your work is quite fascinating, and it appears to be applicable to my own profession in a way." Holmes' smile spread across his face. "You wish to learn from me, then? That is very good information to have on hand." Mentally, I cursed. Of course he would figure out what I meant. "Well, then, I'll take my leave." Holmes nodded, and I left. I had been hoping to make it back to my room in time to distract myself with the trashy novels that Mary had lent me, but it was far too late. By the time I got there, my head was focused solely on every unpleasant aspect of my childhood at once, and my heart rate elevated as my hands shook harder. Ever since childhood, I have been afflicted by nervous fits, although my parents believed me to have recovered from them. Around age 8, I had started to recognize the signs of one coming on, and secluded myself to some remote corner of the farm to be alone. My parents were never of any help during these fits, and could actively make them worse depending upon their actions, so I decided seclusion was the best choice. During these fits, my mind would become focused solely upon unpleasant things, every bad memory, the consequences of every action, and what could happen should my parents or I make particular decisions and the repercussions thereof. One such subject was my parents' financial state. They had told me on many occasions how precarious it was, and reinforced that with arguments between them on the subject. Thus I worried about this and many other things until my body could no longer worry, being exhausted and detached enough for me to calm down. One blessing I discovered was that I could keep myself sufficiently distracted to avoid these fits. To do this, I threw myself into my studies, and when I wasn't studying, I was doing housework or reading novels. In this way, I progressed through my schooling at an accelerated rate. My uncle noticed this and offered to pay for my education once I had exhausted everything available in my hometown. When I had done so, his offer allowed me to remain even more distracted. While the change in environment did much to alleviate the symptoms which plagued me, even so, there were certain behaviors or topics that I did my best to avoid in order to prevent the fits. I generally did well, only having 1 or 2 every week or so. I went to the front around that point, where I was blessedly spared from any such experiences the whole time I was there. Not a one. The war waged on around me, I went about my work with dedication. Unfortunately, I would later learn that one problem can seemingly fix another, until they are later compounded. This was my situation after the conversation with Holmes. I began to have a fit as I made it to my bedroom, and I was too far gone for any book to distract me. My heartbeat sped far past a healthy pace as I took in deep breaths to calm myself. They were only memories, and I was far away in London. I was in London. At that point, I could not tell you if my heartbeat slowed or quickened, but as I reminded myself that I was in London, I remembered Ypres, and the soldiers and nurses who were still there, those whom I had all but abandoned, and I became lost to the world. I was lost on the battlefield for an unknown amount of time. There was endless shelling, and everywhere around me soldiers stuck in the mud, shrapnel piercing their skulls. Someone was calling for me. Of course they were. I was the doctor. But where was the voice coming from? Where? I came to suddenly with a sharp stinging across my cheek. Before me was the face of Mrs. Hudson, who peered back into my eyes. "Are you with us now?" Yes," I managed a stuttered response. Mary was looking at me from behind Mrs. Hudson, her hands covering her mouth, horror in her eyes. "I'm sorry for slapping you, but the salts that Jonathan left with Mary weren't working." The haze that had settled over my mind started to lift, and reason returned to me. No, they haven't worked on me since I had an issue with my mask in the field. I have high hopes that my sinuses will recover from the trauma, but it's likely too soon." Mrs. Hudson nodded, her lips pursing. "Well, I would just sit if I were you. We don't know if you were only standing there." Her words made me realize the extent of my exhaustion, and I did as she said. "Mary came to check on you and found you just staring into nowhere. She retrieved Sherlock, who thought to get me, and said you were speaking to him about an hour ago. I told him to go get you a pot of strong tea while I dealt with you. Mary, why don't you go help him? The doctor will be all right now." Mary, whose face was still one of concern and fear, glanced at me, so I gave her a smile. There was no need to worry her unnecessarily. She then ran out of the room. "You've got a bad case of shell shock if I've ever seen one." I shook my head. "But I don't." Mrs. Hudson looked down at me, then shook her head. "Doctor, do you think an old woman like me doesn't know what's what? I will not have you denying it. Now, do you know what triggered your behavior?" Her tone made clear that there was to be no arguing, and it was best just to answer her question. I started to shake my head, then paused. "I was remembering something unpleasant from childhood." Mrs. Hudson nodded. "Best not to think about unpleasant things, then. Once you start, it's all you can think about, and you will eventually get to more recent memories." She gave me a sympathetic look. "Lord willing, you will get through this." I tried to smile back. When Mary came in with a steaming teacup, while Holmes walked behind her, holding a card. Mary handed me the tea as Holmes placed the card on my lap. I stared down at it confused. It was a gold-embossed calling card, upon which was written, "J. Downing, Solicitor, 223 Bourne Street." I glanced up in confusion, and he made a circular gesture with his hand while Mrs. Hudson looked on in suspicion. On the back was written, "Client in need of discretion. Will call again tonight, 11 p.m. "What on earth?" I muttered again, which caused Holmes to grin. "That is what I would like to know, Doctor. Will you be up to the task of joining me for this interview?" Excitement flooded through me. "Certainly." Mary immediately made her usual protest. "Wait a minute. Dr. Watson has just had a very unpleasant time, and you want her to assist you on a case?" Before either I or Holmes could reply, Mrs. Hudson spoke. "Oh, leave them alone, dear. The distraction will be good for the doctor. It is quite a while until midnight, so she'll have plenty of time to rest. And she will rest." The last sentence, spoken quite firmly, was half directed at me, given how tightly she squeezed my shoulder, and half at Holmes, who she gave an intense glare. Neither of us thought to disobey. With Mrs. Hudson's warning, Holmes made haste to vacate the room, I assumed to prepare for this visitor. I sipped the tea and fingered the gold-embossed lettering of the card. Frowning, I scratched at it with a nail until a bit of the leafing came off, which I then picked up and placed upon my tongue, as Mary watched in rapt horror. Glancing at her face, I realized that she was about to call for someone, and raised my hand to assure her I was aware of myself. "I'm all right, Mary. I just wanted to see if it was real gold or paint." Incredulity filled her face as I tried to convince her. "I wanted to know if it was someone who merely wants to look rich or is rich. Either way, gold-embossed calling cards are tacky." Mary closed her eyes and pinched the bridge of her nose. "With the number of things I've seen my brother do, you would think me past surprise, but I thought you were better than that, Johanna." I shrugged in response, and she pursed her lips. "Because of your episode, I think I can forgive you. Did you at least get the answer you were looking for?" "Maybe." "What do you mean, maybe?" "Well, the embossing certainly tastes like gold, so the solicitor must only work for the best-paying clientele." "Of course he does. That's why he recommended the client to me. Quite annoying, but it is work that pays. Holmes had come back into the room talking, carrying his most recent handwork. He frowned down at the missing gilding on the card which lay in my lap. "Rather rudimentary way to test for gold, Watson. Not bad work, though. It may be possible to get you paying attention to things yet." I rolled my eyes. I paid plenty of attention to things. At least, that was how I felt about the matter. Mary glared at her brother. "I still don't think Johanna should be assisting you with anything. She's still in quite ill health." Holmes glanced at his sister as he settled himself into the chair next to mine. "I do believe that is the good doctor's choice, Mary. Mycroft may be acting as her guardian, but you know as well as I do that he won't try to overrule her decisions, provided they're not to her detriment." "Well, I think they are!" Mary huffed and crossed her arms, upset. I wasn't certain whether to be angry at her lack of respect for my autonomy, or flattered at how much she cared for my safety, even if it was mostly fueled by a need to mother something until the baby came. I sighed. The plain truth was that I simply didn't know when to stop. I've always been tired and a bit lifeless. Any energy I've had was from the sheer will to do whatever I had set out to do, or avoidance of something unpleasant. While in London I had been growing listless. Making copies helped, but the fact of the matter was that assisting Holmes with his case was the first time I had felt excitement in years. The first time that it didn't feel like it took Herculean effort to do anything at all. Some may find this odd, that I would push myself to do more when I struggled to do anything at all, but the fact of the matter was this had been expected of me all my life. In the Watson family you had to be seen by the outsiders as exceptional. If you were not, lies were told, and it was expected that you would turn them into truths. It had only gotten worse when my older brother had made a fool of himself and ran off to Europe, leaving a trail of lies to be untangled in his wake. Because of this I had to be better, smarter, stronger, wiser. In truth, it had been a relief to run off to the front. Uncle Hefner had some idea that something was wrong. It was part of why he offered to send his sister's children to college. He thought to give us a bit of a chance to escape, but it only raised the expectations of the family and community. I had fulfilled all expectations to become a doctor and a daughter that could be boasted about, but I was stuck in limbo, not certain of what to do. Going to the front had been my release. No lies, no forced persona, and everyone there felt like every task was an ungodly drain upon the body. I had a purpose there. A real purpose, and with just one panicked decision, it was gone, taken from me. Now I was forced to confront life without it. Holmes' cases at least brought excitement, if not purpose, but Mary wanted me to rest, to do nothing. Is that what is normally expected of the recovering injured? As a doctor, I certainly would expect it of my patients, but I can't live like that. I have to be doing something. The fear of feeling as though life is meaningless keeps me at work. Mary's sour look turned to concern as she once again saw my face go blank. "Johanna?" I had been staring past her, not realizing how similar my face was when lost in thought to when I was lost entirely. I felt a hand on my arm, and I blinked and shook my head, turning to look at Holmes, who was staring at me questioningly. Sorry." I turned back to Mary. "I was lost in thought. The fact of the matter is, you're right. I'm not well yet, but I can't do nothing. All of the romance novels in the world can't stop me from needing to work." Mary's head drooped and her lips came into a pout. "You are far too much like Sherlock." "Me? Like him?" I glanced to my side and pointed at the man who still had his hand upon my arm, likely to ensure that I stayed grounded. She nodded. "You'll both work yourselves to death and insist that it's not enough. The only difference is you need work for purpose, and he only needs it because he hates to be bored." I laughed, turning to Holmes. "And what indeed is your purpose for living, if not to put an end to crime?" I had fully intended the question as a joke, and was not prepared for the answer I received. "Love, of course." My brow furrowed in confusion. He had answered my rhetorical question neither quickly nor slowly. His answer was calm and dry, without any trace of the sarcasm I usually received from most who answered that question. What?" "I said love, doctor. Do you need your hearing checked?" Mary actually perked and giggled at the use of sarcasm. Holmes had removed his hand from my arm and begun to work on his project when he answered the question. "I just didn't expect." I froze for a moment, briefly thinking my words over. "I didn't expect that as an answer from you. I usually get answers like God or work, and the few times it's been love were usually in jest." Holmes nodded. "Yes, I'm sure soldiers answering that question usually do answer with some bitterness mixed in. Before you go developing theories, Watson, I have never been in love, nor do I ever expect to be." "But you just—" "Love for my family, Dr. Watson. Mary, her unborn child, my mother, even Mycroft to an extent." Mary snorted a laugh. "My love for my family gives me more than enough purpose, as you would describe, but that is an irrelevant point. I stated love alone as my purpose for living so that it would get your attention." I shook my head. "Well, it certainly did that, but—" "The fact that I exist gives me more than enough purpose in life, and it should give you yours." "I don't understand." "Of course you don't. Watson, you, like many people, have been misled to believe that you must have something to give your life purpose, to make you content and fulfilled, that if you don't find a way to imbue your lives with value, you are a waste of space. The fact of the matter is, you exist. That is your value. Any work you do for your own or others' betterment only paints a picture of the kind of human you are. It doesn't create you." I was confused. I knew, of course, that God loves a person no matter how sinful, but that doesn't change the fact that we are sinful creatures regardless. Holmes looked at my face and squinted. "You're thinking of Sunday school lessons, aren't you?" He sighed and set his sewing down upon his lap. "Watson, let me put this in a way you will understand. You believe, fundamentally, that God created man, correct?" I nodded, still somewhat dumbfounded. "Then you are aware of Jeremiah 1:1. "Well, yes, God is omnipotent." "Do not interrupt me, Watson." His gray eyes flashed fiercely and cowed me into silence. Mary had an anticipatory look upon her face. "If you are correct in saying that God is omnipotent, that means that he can see every single outcome your life could possibly have, including the bad ones. Still, he created you and allowed you to make your own decisions thus far. Why?" I shook my head. "Because he values you, Doctor. You don't have to live your life trying to prove that you have value. Your existence is proof of it." He finished and took a deep breath before resuming his sewing. Mary gave me a sly smile that seemed laced with apology. "We should have warned you. Shirley has a few theological points that he considers to be absolute nonsense, and if you embark upon them, you will get a lecture." Taken aback and not wanting to argue further, I picked up the book on the table beside me and began to read. Or rather, I attempted to, as I considered Holmes' words. An hour or so later, Mary suggested that she and Holmes leave so that I might take a nap. Initially, I was hesitant. I still had nightmares quite often and was somewhat fearful of being alone. Nevertheless, I agreed. There was no certainty of how late I would be up sitting in on Holmes' interview, and it was better that I try to get some rest. The two left, and I made my way to bed where thoughts filled my mind. Holmes' words kept running through my head. I didn't think he was a Christian. I had pegged him for an agnostic, though it shouldn't surprise me that he would have read the Bible for himself. After all, he never claimed to be Christian, only used Christian values to make me understand his personal theology. Yes, that made more sense. Still, I couldn't argue that he was wrong. My existence justifies itself. Nothing special need be done if I didn't want to. Yet I had been told that before, and it never seemed true to me. Besides, I didn't really know anything but constant work, and without it, I just feel lost. I took a breath and steeled my mind. I would settle it when I returned to America. What would I do when I returned? Probably join Dr. Sang's practice. He had offered the position to me contingent upon my return, and it would be quite easy compared to what I had already been through. Hell, if I took even half of what I learned on the front and applied it in the States, I would be lauded as a genius. I smiled at the thought. A genius? Hardly. I just got to learn things that many American doctors had yet to. Still, amusement at the thought calmed me to sleep. Part 8. I found myself on the battlefield once more. Cries of anguish were sent to the sky as I found myself once again mired in the thick mud that pulled at my feet. I lifted my legs as high as they could go and stepped. Again and again, I lifted my legs, though exhaustion made it seem impossible with every step. "Save me!" I searched desperately for the voice. "Save me, please!" This was not the cry of a soldier. I kept stepping and found the source. There was a little girl, fallen into an evacuated trench. She was slowly but surely climbing her way out with the help of a branch that leaned down into the abandoned trench. I called out to her, "I'm here!" But as I reached down into the pit, the girl stared past me with anguished eyes, slapping my hands away each time I nearly had a hold of her. Save me, please!" she sobbed. I jolted awake with a cry that I hardly realized came from my own lips, then stared about in bewilderment and realized where I was. I took deep breaths and tried to steady my hands. It had grown dark, so it seemed I had managed to fall asleep. The door opened and I started, only to see a drowsy Jonathan and a concerned Mary. "Are you all right?" Mary said she heard a cry. I nodded and tried to gather my wits, still unable to speak. I found it quite unpleasant for people to see me at my weakest. Jonathan looked like he was about to examine me when Holmes stepped into the room past him, candle in hand. "Our visitor will arrive in 2 hours, Watson. You need to be ready by then." He stepped to the bedside where I sat and brought the candle to my face, inspecting it. "She'll be all right, Wells, only a nightmare. You can go back to bed. Mary, if you'll be kind enough to get her something to eat, I'll stay with her." Jonathan looked pensive, but his face turned firm. "All right, then. Call me if she needs anything." He then left with Mary, who, despite the late hour, was still dressed. Holmes pulled one of the chairs to the bedside and sat leaning back. "Will Mary be joining us for the interview?" "No." "Then why is she still dressed?" "Mary enjoys staying up late, needs very little sleep. It's a Holmes family trait. She takes it to the extreme, though, only sleeps about 4 hours a night. Healthy enough, despite it." "I see." I had managed to stop gasping, not that it helped much. I was trembling fiercely, and the dream was seated firmly in my mind. "Do you want to talk about it?" I drew my knees to my chin, relinquishing complete control of my body language. "Not really," I murmured, tears pricking at my eyes. No, I would not cry in front of a stranger. No. Yet my control was lost, and the tears came. Holmes graciously ignored them. "Do you still wish to attend the interview?" I nodded and drew another gasping breath. "I can have myself together by then. I'm sorry." "Sorry for what, Doctor?" Holmes' words had a strange tone that I failed to recognize as a warning before responding. "For losing control of myself." "Doctor, you've returned from one of the worst battlefields with a stoicism that is generally expected from seasoned officers. The fact that a nightmare bothers you is of little importance." I stared at his form, unable to see the majority of his features in the candlelight. "I don't like to be a burden." "I see." Mary came back then, and I realized that she made the entire journey in the dark. She knew well the layout of her ancestral home. She was holding a tray with a bowl of soup. "Here you are, Johanna." She set the tray down upon my lap. "This will do you good." "Did you just—" Words failed me as I tried to form my question, but fortunately Holmes understood. "Mary is something like a bat, Dr. Watson. She is far more comfortable in the dark than the light." I couldn't see her face, but somehow I knew that she was quite proud. "I can see quite well. In fact, I can tell that you've been crying. Surely, what did you say to her?" The sheer absurdity of the situation made me laugh. An hour later I had eaten and freshened myself and joined Holmes in the sitting room. Whoever wanted his services must really not want to be seen if they were calling at 11 o'clock at night. Holmes was wearing a silken formal dressing gown that quite suited him. Even I had to admit that in the firelight he cut a dashing figure, though a fair knight of yore he was not. My face flushed as I remembered that particular novel. My parents would not have approved of its contents. I realized now why he insisted upon making me look respectable. If his clientele included mysterious rich men, I could hardly see fit to drag down his image. Holmes stood staring out the window for some time, curtains wrapped about his form to block the light from the fire, while I sat comfortably nearby it, enjoying the warmth. Holmes made a whistle, and I glanced at him once more. "It appears our guest is here, Watson." It was not long before our guest was brought up, and it took everything I had not to laugh upon first sight. The Holmes family butler had brought up a man dressed in fine black velvet, fully suited and wearing a cape to keep out the night chill. He was tall, with a set of whiskers that any woman would have disdain for, although what really made him stand out was the fact that a black velvet mask covered his eyes, which made him look so like the villain from one of Mary's novels that I had to bite my lips to prevent a laugh. Holmes greeted him coolly. "I see that you are Solicitor Downing's client. I assume that you would like your identity to remain unknown." The man responded in good, if heavily accented English. "Yes, Mr. Holmes, I was told that you could help me with my problem, but—" He paused, glancing down at me. "Dr. Johanna Watson, face of the Red Cross, is my colleague. You may speak to her as you would to me. Her discretion is unmarred." "Very well." Holmes offered him a seat across from me while walking over to the fireplace. "Now, what is this problem that you require help with?" The man shifted, staring at Holmes for a moment. "There is a woman," he spoke slowly, clearly thinking over his words before he said them, "a British opera singer by the name of Irene Adler. We had an understanding." He glanced at me before continuing. "She was a lovely woman, beautiful, cultured. We spent much time together, but—" He glanced between me and Holmes, who gestured for him to continue. "She was not of my status, and I had to end things with her." I glanced to Holmes, whose face showed no visible change. "I see. And why exactly are you seeking my services?" Annoyance laced his voice, which surprised me. It came as no shock to me that a wealthy man would fraternize with a woman he did not intend to marry. "When I was with her, I agreed to take a photo, something that I did not see as problematic at the time, but were she to publish it now—" He paused. "I need the photo either recovered or destroyed. Some reassurance that it will never see the light of day. I will pay handsomely." He kept glancing at me the whole time, and finally an idea seemed to form. "Had I only romanced someone with a noble profession like your colleague, I would not find myself in this situation." I then realized why he kept looking at me. Fear of judgment would do that to a person. I kept a blank face. Men like him always did try to ply the good graces of those they deemed worthy. "Someone like my colleague would think twice before entertaining the advances of manipulative British gentry, sir." My eyes snapped to Holmes, who was glaring at our visitor. How could he have the audacity? Apparently our visitor thought the same, because he stood, anger pouring from him. I shrank into my chair, cringing away from what I feared would become a physical altercation, but our visitor only stared into Holmes' face before carefully sitting back down. "You know well I can't afford a scandal, Mr. Holmes." He was still angry, but in deferring to Holmes had dropped what had apparently been an affected accent. I had never seen someone take charge of a situation through mere presence alone, yet now I was transfixed by Holmes. "If it were not for the war, I would insist upon exposing you to every paper in this country and the rest. The fact that you come to me with this trifle when there are far more important things at hand is abominable." The man's hands clenched, but he said nothing. "For the good of the country, I will take care of this situation for you, sir." but no others. Go home to your wife." The man quietly stood and pulled a small pouch from his pocket, placing it upon the table beside the chair. "An advance for your expenses." He received only a withering glare in response. "Good night, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson." He left, leaving me in confused awe. "Holmes? Who was that?" Holmes glared down at me. "An old family friend, thinking he could fool me with that ridiculous mask and farce of an accent. What an ego." His face softened and he shook his head. "I won't tell you who he was, Watson. Consider discovering his identity a sort of challenge." "Ah, very well then." I glanced down at the pouch he had left, and Holmes gestured for me to pick it up. Doing so, I realized that it was purple velvet. I gave a little gasp as I realized that the ribbon that closed it had a diamond fastener. Holmes smiled and held out his hand, and I placed the pouch in it, somewhat disappointed to give it up. He opened the pouch and gave an annoyed sigh as he poured the contents into his hands. "That man has the subtlety of a bull elephant," he stated, pouring the shining gold sovereigns out into his other hand, pocketing them. He then held the pouch out to me. "Here." "What's this for?" "You seem to like it, so you can have it. I have no use for such a thing. It'll go unappreciated in a drawer." I shook my head. "I can't, shouldn't. Perhaps Mary will want it." Holmes fixed me with that school-teacher glare once more, and I began to waver. An idea seemed to cross his mind, and he smirked. "Dr. Watson, what is the polite thing to do when offered a gift?" I felt my face twitch with embarrassment. I knew the answer he wanted. It would be painful to say. "Well," he drew out the word in that painfully corrective tone, to which I muttered in response. "What was that?" I clenched my hand into a fist and took a deep breath before responding. "Accepted graciously." "Very good, Doctor, very good. Now go get some rest. It's been a long day for you." He held the pouch out to me, and my face spasmed as I stood to take it, holding back my embarrassment. I attempted to speak through gritted teeth. "Thank you. Good night." "Good night, Doctor." I could feel the smug amusement emanating from him as I retreated from the room. The events of the night raced through my mind. I once again was incredibly frustrated with Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Really, treating me like a child any time I displayed behavior he disapproved of. It was uncalled for. I sighed as I considered the truth of the matter. My reticence had bordered on rudeness, and I couldn't deny the effectiveness of his corrective method. I laid on my back in bed, the little velvet bag in my hands, soft and fuzzy. It was a grounding feeling as I lay there in the dark. He was a strange man, this detective. At least Mycroft didn't try to patronize me, so I was content with knowing that he, at least, was far smarter than me. Still, something about Sherlock made me want him to think me clever. I bit my lip and thought, he really did remind me of my grandmother. She, at least, was someone I wanted to be proud of me, and she was. She was never one to waste praise, but I knew by her smile when she heard I had graduated that I was her favorite. I laughed aloud. It figured I would be conflating the two. How long had it been since I last saw her? I thought carefully. It had been over a year. It seemed like so little when I thought about how short a time I spent at Epe. Was she all right? Was she alive? She had been quite old when I left, growing weaker. I prayed that she'd be well, at least until I could make it home. She wouldn't begrudge me for not being at her side, but it was by her side I most wanted to be. I supposed permitting Holmes to mother me a bit couldn't hurt. He knew London far better than I, and I needed someone to defer to. Jonathan was lovely, but far too soft-spoken for me to consider a superior, and I did need someone telling me what to do. Most people prefer to be in charge of themselves, I suppose, but I had spent much of my life pretending I knew what I was doing when I really felt helpless and alone. Being able to just listen and obey was a much-needed reprieve from that exhaustive state. I longed for Miss Patty or Nanny, someone with whom I was familiar and trusted, but that was a hopeless thought. I would have preferred Mycroft Holmes, but he was content to let me do as I pleased so long as I wasn't killing myself. Ah, well, it's not as though it can be helped. I then prayed aloud as I looked to the ceiling, my hands lowering to my stomach as I did so. How long had it been since I last prayed aloud? I wasn't certain, but it seemed to be as good a time to start as any. He is a very strange man, but I do appreciate you making him. He reminds me of grandmother, and it is nice to be reminded of home when I'm so far away. I took a deep breath. I can't say that I'm feeling any better than I did before I went to the front, but it was quite a reprieve. I do wish the nightmares would go away, though. I don't quite know what you have planned for me. I had hoped the work you had for me would be finished when I went to eat. I paused at the thought. I was ever so tired, and it seemed like life would never end. But you have always been full of surprises, and I'm trying my best to enjoy them while I'm here. Amen. Content with my little prayer, I drifted off to sleep. My dreams were odd that night. I recalled some memories of my first mathematics tutor, as well as some old memories of playing with my brother's dogs. Once or twice I found myself on the battlefield, but just as the dread began to set into my bones, the scene would slip away to something more neutral, if not pleasant. I began to slowly emerge from the recesses of sleep, vaguely aware that someone was in the room. The air was not moving as it should. I opened my eyes, expecting to see Mary. I did not see Mary. What I did see was a gray, squirming mass of fur being held directly in my line of sight. A yelp escaped my lips as I threw myself in a panic to the right, falling off the bed violently to the floor with a loud thud. "Oh, heavens!" I heard above me, and Mrs. Hudson came around the side of the bed. "Are you all right, dear? Can you stand?" I looked up at her, the wind knocked out of me, then painfully brought myself to my knees, gasping a bit. At this point, an annoyed Holmes came around and slipped his hands underneath my arms, hoisting me to my feet, then helped me back up onto the bed. Had I realized she would react so, I wouldn't have surprised her like this. Mrs. Hudson had spoken and looked rather guilty. I, still dazed, glanced down beside me on the bed where a small newborn pup was squirming. "Oh!" I surprised everyone, including myself, with my soft tone. I picked up the puppy and brought it close. "Oh, what a darling! It's so small. Is it all right?" "It's the runt of the litter, but it's spunky, so it will be fine," Mrs. Hudson said with pride. Holmes had kept his hand on my shoulder, ensuring that I remained stable. Mrs. Hudson's terrier went into labor at around 4 a.m. It's 7 now, and the whole litter has been born. "I wanted to give you a surprise." Mrs. Hudson disappointedly shook her head. "I had no idea that it would scare you so badly." I smiled, looking down at my legs, which were probably forming bruises. "Well, maybe if you hadn't had him right in my face, but—" I paused, cuddling the puppy. "You should take him back to his mamma. They need to eat a lot at this age." Mrs. Hudson smiled back and took the puppy, leaving the room. I looked to Holmes. "Is it really so normal for people to come into others' bedrooms unannounced in this household?" Holmes gave me a blank look in response. "Is it normal to sleep fully clothed in yours?" I crossed my arms in response. "I swear nothing has seemed normal since your appearance in this house." Holmes gave a smile. "I have some investigations to do today, and will have to do it alone, but I thought that you might enjoy watching the process of preparation." Holmes helped me off the bed, and I followed him to his room where Mary was waiting, practically vibrating with excitement. He shut the door and then stripped down to his underclothes. I, being confused and somewhat embarrassed, looked to Mary for an explanation, who had flitted to a closet and retrieved a shabby set consisting of pants, cap, and jacket. She handed these to her brother, who proceeded to step behind a dressing screen. Meanwhile, I wondered why he hadn't gone straight there to begin with. When he had changed, he sat at a table where he and Mary began to put most stage makeup to shame. When they were finished, I could hardly tell that I was looking at the same person. The red mutton chops that came down the sides of his head were unnerving. "Well, what do you think?" Mary shifted back and forth in excitement, awaiting my answer. "It's very, different." I stared wonderingly. The man before me could hardly be called dashing, With scar on his left cheek and a beard that was as bright as the chops, Holmes laughed deep and hearty, a distinct Scottish accent making itself known. "Well, I suppose it's as good a disguise as any, wouldn't you say, girlie?" The costumed Holmes grinned eerily as he spoke, and I stood stunned for a few moments before making up my mind. No, 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 no. Mary, Holmes, have a good time with whatever. I paused, gesturing at the strange-looking man before me. This is, but I will have no part in it. I beat a hasty retreat to the door as the man in question roared with laughter. It was late in the day by the time Holmes returned, triumphant and excited. "I found her, Watson!" Mary and I had been seated by the fire, sewing dresses for the baby, and I glanced at her before looking back at Holmes. Found who?" The red man looked down at me, disappointed. "Miss Adler, Watson. She's currently working wartime relief shows, not proper opera. The musicals being put on are ridiculous, if amusing. We'll go to see one tomorrow. Be sure to rest in preparation." Very well." Mary grinned at my expression of confusion. "What did you find out, Shirley?" Mary continued, working on a rather complex embroidery pattern on one of the dresses, despite having asked the question. Holmes clapped his hands together excitedly, about to begin, before looking down at my stare. He looked rather strange in all that makeup, and I was rather captivated by it, in a horrified sort of way. "Give me a moment, Mary. It appears that our dear doctor will be unable to pay attention if I do not make myself presentable." He left, leaving me blushing at his comment while Mary giggled. "Don't worry, Joe. The first time we did that to his face, I couldn't stop staring either. Doesn't he look ghastly?" I nodded, still stunned by his appearance, even with him removed from the room. "We needed him to appear low class, you see. It's much easier to get around certain places if you can blend in. We chose red hair and the scar due to how distracting they are. Those two things pull you in so thoroughly that you don't even notice his true height. All of his repeat disguises have something like that, a flaw in appearance that people can't help but fixate upon. It works like a charm." I nodded. It certainly did do that. If I hadn't watched the transformation, I never would have believed that the red-headed worker was in any way associated with the Holmes family. Holmes returned with his usual slicked-back hair and woolen suit, which made me far more comfortable. He stood before the two of us, clearly excited. "Now, where was I? Yes, Miss Adler is currently working on the musicals for wartime relief. Quite a step down for such a lovely singer, but it can't be helped. I went to several opera houses before finding her and offered to help with the sets. Got a splendid view of her in return. Let me tell you, Watson, she is a vision of womanly beauty." This exclamation left me a bit surprised, but Mary's face held none, so I simply nodded. "Beautiful red hair and green eyes, and something else of significance. She's American." I perked up at this information. "Is that why you want me to attend the show tomorrow night? Wait." I paused, thinking for a moment. "Your client said she was British. If he's gentry, how on earth did he make that mistake?" Holmes nodded. "Still a bit slow, Watson, but good job catching, I suppose. You are forgetting that he also put on a fake accent. Calling her British was only a way to attempt to make his ruse seem real." I nodded, choosing to ignore the insult. "I was originally going to trick her into letting me into the house, but I do believe that it will be much easier to get you in." I gave a look of incredulity. "And you expect me to look for the photograph on my own?" Holmes waved me off with his hand. "Hardly. You will be with your uncle, Reverend Phelps." I glared at him. "Fine then, Reverend, but how on earth do we convince her to let me call on her?" Holmes gave that mischievous smirk once more. Part 9. I hate everything. That was my thought the following night when I saw the costume that Marion Holmes had prepared for me. "You can't be serious! I'll trip and die!" Holmes placed a hand upon my shoulder. "Come now, Watson, it's the theater! You need to look your best." I stared at the pink evening gown that the two expected me to wear. "Holmes, I can barely move in these short skirts. How on earth do you expect me to manage in that?" "With your uncle's help, my dear Watson. Now, Mary will assist you in getting dressed. I must prepare." With this he ran off, leaving me alone with the beastly garment. I looked imploringly at Mary. "I don't suppose that I could just wear literally anything else?" Mary shook her head. "Absolutely not, Joe. Now come here." Anyone who has not been subjected to the whims of a fashionable noblewoman can never understand my pain. Mary dressed me like a doll as I stood staring into the mirror in horror. You would have thought they would take my complexion into account when choosing the color of the fabric, but alas, it seemed they had not. Instead, they thought to put me into a ridiculous pink monstrosity that made me look absolutely ghastly. She did, at least, work wonders with my hair, pinning it up in a style that it hadn't seen since before the war. As she finished, there was a knock on the door, and an older man with thick gray whiskers and minister's garb entered as Mary opened the door. I was not about to be caught off guard again, and was about to greet Holmes when he spoke. "Ghastly! Absolutely ghastly!" He looked me over in excitement. My brow furrowed. "This color was on purpose?" Holmes overlooked my poor grammar and nodded. "Well, of course, we need Miss Adler to pity you. The plan is that we will attend the play, then call upon Miss Adler in her dressing room. That's where you come in. I've arranged for you to call upon her after the show, speak about America and how much you miss it, or some such womanly nonsense. This should secure you an invitation to her home where the photo is most likely to be stored." I realized that he was banking on our common nationality to bond us, and decided not to tell him the disdain that the various states tend to hold for each other. Besides, being alone in a foreign land, he was probably right. I ignored the bristling of my nerves that his word choice incited. After all, women do tend to discuss many topics which men find to be nonsensical, in a similar fashion to men discussing topics which women view as utterly absurd at best. The journey to the theater was an uneventful one. Holmes and his get-up seemed as meek and genteel as an actual minister could be. We entered the theater with our arms linked, and I leaned heavily upon him. I noted that, despite the war, the more well-off attendees wore outfits not dissimilar to mine. I had to subdue the sneer trying to cross my lips, taking a deep breath as Holmes led me to my seat, my balance relying almost entirely upon him. I told myself that these women were doing their best, and I was not to judge them as silly or frivolous for trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. God knows we all needed it. The show was a patriotic one. I smiled, knowing well that the shows in the U.S. at the moment were shifting to share the sensibilities of the ones here. Rallying the people in an attempt to raise national morale was a much-needed frivolity, I will admit. Holmes subtly grasped my hand when Miss Adler came on stage. She was playing a man, but even so, her beauty was not unnoticeable. In fact, it was the first thing I noticed. Her shining red hair pulled back in a queue, unmarred flawless skin, and green eyes that could be seen even from our seat. Her voice was clear and sweet, singing like only a professional could. I was so enraptured by her beauty that for a moment I was quite envious. What woman wouldn't be when gazing upon such a vision of loveliness? I had only ever been this captivated once before, and as I thought back upon that moment, I lost all knowledge of the performance before me. Patty Bowen was the beauty of the town. Although she did not attend my university, she was always up to date on the local gossip. The woman ran the local beauty parlor and gave special discounts to the poorer of the medical students. She always said that it would bless her down the line, and to us few women and the men who dared to come in for a shave, she was an angel on earth. With skillful fingers that thoroughly washed and dried hair, leaving only shine and cleanliness behind. One would not initially think to compare Miss Patty with Miss Adler. I acknowledged that the two women could not be more different, one with the darkest complexion, the other with the lightest. Indeed, if side by side, banded onyx would be the best descriptor for the two women. Patty with her hair dark and curled and deep brown eyes, Miss Adler with her fiery red hair and green eyes, and yet they shared that shining beauty which enraptures and draws in those caught in its glow. I drew the conclusion beauty must be some innate inward quality. For two women so different to produce the same reaction. Holmes patted my arm, and I glanced up at him, his eyes crinkling as he grinned. Beautiful, isn't she? I must admit, I was quite taken with her when I saw her. I've never seen such beauty. He expressed himself in a whisper as he drew me in close, his eyes darting between me and the actress on stage. I couldn't help but smile. He seemed so innocent. In that moment, I forgot that we were there to perform a task and saw only a child reacting to true beauty. She is. I really only know one other person as beautiful as she. Holmes glanced down, seemingly disbelieving, but seemed to settle on a conclusion as he said nothing more. When the play ended, we had to wait for the crowds to clear, which took far more time than I would have preferred. Perfumes often leave me with quite a headache, and on that evening women had made liberal use of their scant reserves. I winced in pain a number of times as several women passed by. Holmes raised a brow, and I shook my head. You would think, with all the gas attacks I've had to endure, I would have lost my sense of smell entirely by now. He gave a sympathetic smile and handed the flowers he had brought me. There is some peppermint mixed in with the flowers. It should help. I buried my face in the bouquet. Mary's idea? No, Miss Adler's garden is made up of many large herbal shrubs. The place smells divine, but if she asks, it was your idea. I nodded, and after the crowds cleared, we made our way to the back of the theater. Holmes was greeted by a young man who led us to the dressing rooms. I'm afraid only the young lady will be able to go in, sir. We don't want any scandal about our theater. Miss Adler is a missus now, after all. Of course. I know well how important a young lady's reputation is. My niece here is my pride and joy, after all. I suppressed a smile and rapped at Miss Adler's door. Her melodic voice called me in, and I stepped through the doorway into a lady's paradise. The smell of sage overwhelmed, caressing my sensitive sinuses with a gentle smoke. A bundle rested on a platter which lay on a table to the side, emitting the fragrance which gave me refuge from the perfumes of the attendees. Across from me was a beautiful vanity covered in a lace cloth and filled with an assortment of various bottles and jars. Costumes hung on racks covering every wall except that above the burning sage, which was also surrounded by several candles. One could not claim that the room's owner was unconscious of the risk of fire. Miss Adler sat in a chair wearing a dressing gown and smiled at me over her shoulder. There were small wrinkles around her eyes that indicated her love of smiling so. "Hello! Toby said you were a fan. Oh, are those for me?" She gestured to the flowers still in my hands, and I nodded. "Set them down there. I'll get some water for them later. And sit down, dear. You really shouldn't be standing at all." I did as she said and sunk into the chair across from her. "There, isn't that better? No, don't introduce yourself yet. Let me get a good look at you." Her long white fingers caressed her chin as she looked me up and down. It dawned on me that she was rather older than I initially thought, perhaps 35 or so. "A nurse?" "No, you don't quite have that look about you. Dear me, you've clearly been to the front, but what could have—" She paused for a moment. "You're not a surgeon, are you?" I gave a nod. She certainly had brains to go with her beauty. "Ah, that explains it then. Trained in Pennsylvania with the Quakers?" "How did you know?" She gave a knowing smile. "Well, there aren't all that many places a woman could get that kind of training. But there is so much more to learn here in Europe, isn't there? I was just reading about a new technique of bone setting that they've discovered, and in the trenches, no less. So, you're also American, then?" She spoke with a soft kindness that permeated her voice, and yet she seemed master of the conversation. More and more she reminded me of Miss Patty. "Yes, I came to help, and I'm afraid I was only in the trenches for a few months before shrapnel ended my campaign." Her eyes softened. "That must have been terribly hard. Are the nurses making out all right?" "I can only speak for those at Ypres, but only one other was injured severely. It was fatal for her, though." She nodded. "What is your name, dear? I'm afraid I can't guess it, and I'm usually so good at guessing names." I could feel my muscles relaxing as I breathed in the healing fumes of the sage. "It's Johanna Watson. My uncle brought me to see your show. Said that you were the only American that he knew of in Britain." Her eyes almost twitched as she thought for just a moment. "Ah, so he's the minister that Toby mentioned. Has he been good to you since coming to London? I know that British men can be quite different from Americans." Amusement flooded through me. "He has been as good as one can expect from a relative that one has never met. Bit on the stern side, but quite kind." Good. If you had answered any different, dear, I would have snatched you up myself. I know well how lonely it can be in a new country with no friends. I allowed myself a laugh at this. I appreciate your concern, but I'm afraid I would be in the way. Toby mentioned that you just got married? Miss Adler's eyes sparkled at the mention of her nuptials. Yes, and oh, he is wonderful. He's been courting me for a while, you know. But yesterday we decided that enough was enough and just went out and got married. There was a grizzled worker helping with the horses that agreed to witness. I gave him £1 for his troubles, of course. I'm just so happy. Adler's hands danced and rubbed each other as she spoke, her eyes gazing off into the distance behind me. I had no doubt that she truly loved her new man. If you don't mind my asking, why did you do the play tonight rather than be with him? Her finger once more came to her lips in a coy gesture. My, you are curious. I can't blame you, though. You must have been bedridden for months with those injuries. My face began twitching. I didn't mean— She waved me off with her hand, still amused. He works in the American Embassy. We'll be leaving for America in a few days. Aren't you worried about submarine warfare? Miss Adler shook her head. He must return to the States whether I go with him or not, and I would rather sink into the murky depths with him than be without. I am 40, you know, and he is a child from another marriage. I would like to have a home established before I am too tired and old to raise her up properly. Have you never considered children? Taking your schooling into account, you must be at least 25. Shaking my head, I sighed. I'm afraid that I am quite resigned to being an old maid. I'm content with that thought. When I do return to the States, I plan to join the practice of an old family friend. She looked intrigued. Oh, really? Why didn't you just work with him immediately rather than join the war effort? I felt obligated to at least attempt to help. Christian sentiments, you know. Besides, he has a few more good years until retirement. She nodded. I'm certain he will be happy to be relieved from births. I rolled my eyes at the thought. My gracious, you understand the situation. The poor man hates working on women, believes that it is barely moral for him to be touching and ministering to their needs. Most doctors get over those sorts of feelings, but he never did. Won't hire a man either, because he believes that it's even worse for him to have another man sin in his stead. He was quite happy to find out I was going to medical school. Adler laughed heartily. If only all doctors were as chivalrous as him, the world would certainly be a better place. Or, at least, there would be more lady doctors. Certainly. Miss Adler was beautiful inside and out. I came to very much doubt the impression that Holmes' mysterious guest had tried so hard to impress upon us. She seemed to think for a moment, then a look of realization crossed her face, and she practically leapt out of her seat. "Oh, my dear, you should have said something!" She snatched the sage off the table with something of a shout, smothering it in its dish. "Oh, no, this won't do!" She then shoved a rack of costumes to the side and opening a window that it had hidden. "I'm sorry," I spoke with hesitation, confused and startled. "The smoke!" She acted as if that explained everything, which it didn't. "Here, come now, to the window and get some fresh air this instant." She seized my arm and pulled me to the window, allowing me a view of my own face in the mirror as we passed it. I had flushed quite deeply and suddenly realized the reason for her panic. "It's fine, I'm quite all right," I tried to alleviate her concern. She put one fist on her hip. "Clearly you are not. Oh, dear, I'm afraid it's my fault. I should have taken you from the room the moment I realized what you were. Just how many gases did those blasted Germans expose you to?" I was dumbfounded. She was right that I was having some sort of reaction, but as far as I had been aware, I was enjoying the sage smoke. How aggressively it was going to affect me without intervention was yet to be known. I shook my head. "I'm not quite sure. I do know that I was not the best at getting my mask on. I don't blame you, though. I had no idea I would react to the sage, or I would not have come in." She shook her head. "The window isn't enough. Come." With no regard for the fact that she was in only a dressing gown, she led me out of the room into the hall where Toby and Uncle Phelps waited for me, chatting. The latter took one look at me and sprung up. "What happened?" "I'm afraid that she is having a bad reaction to my potpourri." Turning to me, she said, "Oh, you must let me make it up to you. Come to my home, won't you? We'll have a grand time, and there won't be anything to give you a reaction there." She turned back to Uncle Phelps. "Do take her home and make sure that she comes to see me tomorrow. I want to finish our conversation, and I know that shy girls like her are prone to trying to avoid such things." Uncle Phelps nodded. "Of course, my dear, I shall deliver her to you then. For now, though, I do believe I should take her outside." On the way back home, I had to put even more weight upon Holmes than on the way there. I tried to figure out what could have gone wrong. I had never had such a poor reaction to sage, of all things. Miss Adler's conclusion that it had something to do with the exposures I suffered on the front must be correct, but so far I'd had no such reaction to coal or wood smoke, not even tobacco. Granted, I did not make a habit of breathing those in directly. Holmes initially said nothing, merely walking along in excitement, when suddenly he broke the silence. "I suppose those perfumes had a worse effect on you than we anticipated. I'm sorry about that, Watson." Everything clicked into place. I'd had a cousin with weak lungs that always had issues whenever perfume was involved. My reaction had simply been a delayed one, likely due to my weakened state. "Thank you, Holmes, but no apology is needed. Had I known I would react so poorly, I would not have come with you. And it certainly did its job in securing me a visit to Miss Adler's home. I didn't even have to ask." Holmes nodded. "I suppose we will consider this a useful accident, then." The next day was spent going over the plan to a degree where I began to want out of this operation. I had been questioning it since speaking to Miss Adler, and this was just making it worse. Now go over the plan once more. Sighing, I closed my eyes. "Uncle Phelps will drop me off at Miss Adler's home. He will then leave on church business. I will chat and distract Adler until 7 o'clock, at which point he will light the bushes near the house on fire and shout as such. At this point I am not to take my eyes off her and see where she darts to." Holmes nodded. He was in the middle of putting on his Uncle Phelps makeup and watching me behind him in the mirror. "Cheer up, Watson. We aren't going to do anything to harm Miss Adler. We're only going to prevent her from causing harm to another, even if he really does deserve said harm." This last part was added with a bit of a mumble as he worked applying makeup over his face. I sighed. "That's the only thing making me help you. That, and she reminds me of an old friend." Holmes glanced at me once more through the mirror. "You mentioned that you had seen someone as beautiful as she before." I nodded. "Miss Patty. She ran a beauty parlor and offered discounts to female students for hair washing. Funny thing is, she couldn't be more opposite to Adler as far as looks go, but I would swear an oath that they're like two candles brightly burning. If they were together, it would be blinding." Holmes made a variety of faces, testing the placement and security of his makeup and beard. "Are you certain that this Miss Patty was beautiful, or did her kindness to you overshadow any memory of her actual personage?" I laughed. "You would have to meet her yourself to be certain, but I swear to you that you would be as enraptured by her beauty as you were by Adler's." "I wouldn't say I was enraptured, merely admiring." Right, of course. Nothing short of an angel could enrapture the great Sherlock Holmes. Sarcasm was not usually my forte. I have a tendency toward speaking so flatly that people believe me to be stating the truth, but in this moment the annoyed glare that Holmes shot my way made clear that he understood my sentiments. Uncle Phelps escorted me to Adler's home, as promised. It was a beautiful house that had a glorious garden. I did note that there were very few flowers. The garden was instead filled with shrubs and bushes of every herb imaginable. Sage, peppermint, oregano, rosemary, and many others which I could not recognize. I noted that she had several plants which were unique to South America. How she managed to get them to thrive in a London garden is beyond me. Adler's maid opened the door and let me in, and Uncle Phelps promised to return for me later. The maid led me through to the sitting room where Irene Adler was sitting reading a book. She rose to greet me and surprised me with an embrace. "Oh, dear, I'm so glad you're here. Come, sit down. Did you see the front garden? I'll give you a proper tour later. Abigail, be a dear and make our guests some tea, won't you? I have a tea plant in a small greenhouse in the back garden. I never want for my favorite beverage." Adler just peppered me with these questions and statements, alternating between Abigail and me, and then sat down. "I do hope whoever gets this house next will care for the garden. I've worked so hard to get all the herbs growing just right. I will, of course, be taking seeds back with me to the States, at least of the ones that I won't be able to obtain easily back there, but it will be at least a year before any of the herbs are of a hardy size. My word, it seems at times like this that it's no use to make anywhere homey, but we have already purchased a place back in the States. I suppose I'll have plenty of time to make it my own." She said all of this with a smile on her face as she sat back down in her own chair. I noted that the windows were open, the breeze ruffling the curtains. Adler caught my gaze and smiled. I often burn dried herbs in the house like I did in my dressing room, but I wanted to be certain that you would be comfortable. It's not too cool for you, is it, dear? The fire burned brightly, and I was still wearing my shawl, so I shook my head. Not at all. It was thoughtful of you to take my health so into account, though I suspect that my reaction was more due to the perfumes of the women in attendance rather than to your sage. She perked at this sentiment. Oh, I know! Aren't they just awful? And to think, when I started acting at 14, I just idolized those scents. I wore them so much that I rather seemed to have gotten sick of them. Hence all the herb bushes. I want my house to smell akin to a jungle. She gave a toothy grin as she said this. Now, dear, I did check, and there is space aboard our ship for one more. Are you sure you wouldn't like to return to the United States with me? I froze. I'm sorry? She shook her head. You don't belong here. I'm certain that your uncle is quite nice, but you should be taken care of by your family back home. If you don't want to, you can live with me. I'd be happy to have a live-in doctor. I know submarine warfare is frightening, but plenty of ships are getting through every week without being harmed. She said all of this brazenly, with a smile on her face that read utmost sincerity, and I came to the realization that I was in the presence of one of those beings to whom true kindness comes as naturally as breathing. I shook my head and laughed. Oh, you dear, I'll be quite all right here in London. Besides, my family back home are the ones scared of submarine warfare, not me. Honestly, if they had their way, I would be nestled away in some remote village in the mountains that can only be accessed by trail, but I'm far too stubborn for that. I am content to stay and assist the Red Cross in London until our boys subdue the Germans. And, I added, seeing the concern on her face, I do believe that they will. German morale is failing, and right will win out in the end. Adler accepted my statement with a smile. Oh, very well, but you would do well not to let that uncle of yours get you into any scrapes. He may be a man of the cloth, and he does seem to be a good man, but older men who have never had any children tend to get overbearing when one comes into their care. I knew what she meant. Uncle Hefner was certainly that way, jealously guarding me whenever my parents were not around to do so. However, seeing as she was referring to Holmes's character, I had to stifle a laugh. I know what you mean. Abigail then came in with the tea, and I was surprised by the smell of peppermint. It'll do you good, ma'am. Adler apparently noted my surprise. Abigail mixes various herbs with the tea. My personal favorite is nettles. They do wonders for a headache. There's that too, ma'am. This made me smile, as I felt a comfort that I hadn't felt in a long time. For a good long while Adler and I chatted about various things, such as where we grew up, where she planned to live. California, of all places. Indeed, I nearly forgot that I was there with a job to do. But do it I did, and I would come to feel great shame for doing so. Outside had grown quite dark by the time 7 o'clock rolled around. We had moved on to speaking about our professions and comparing the two when there was a crash and a loud voice called from outside. Fire! Smoke immediately started billowing into the room, and I, startled despite knowing the plan, jumped to my feet, as did Adler. Instead of making her way to the door, I saw her dart to the fireplace. I saw very little after that, as getting up so quickly brought my head swirling, and I fell to my knees. Suddenly, Adler's hands were holding mine, pulling me out of the room and the house to the safety of the front garden. Police and neighbors quickly attended to the fire and reported to Miss Adler, who had made herself busy inspecting my knees, that a prowler had started the fire, likely just to cause chaos. One of the neighbors saw him head east, and there were men chasing after him. Adler pursed her lips. What sort of a personality behaves so in the middle of a war, and now my guest is hurt because of the scare? I assured her that I was all right, but she gave me a look of disbelief, though I was telling the truth. Her carpeted parlor was a much better place to fall than off a great feather bed onto hard wood. Uncle Phelps returned for me, and she made sure to tell him how to care for me. He nodded and smiled jovially, and we left together to return to his home. No need to say, Watson, thanks to the open window, I had the perfect view. I know exactly where she is keeping the photo. Do you now? I wasn't about to doubt Holmes, but I was feeling rather sore about defrauding a woman who was so kind on behalf of a man whose own morality was questionable. We didn't say anything about the affair for the rest of the evening, and returned to the house the next day with his client to find it empty. Everything in the house that could be packed was gone, leaving only the rented furniture in its place. Holmes darted to the mantel and broke into a small safe that was to one side as his client began to fume. Inside, instead of the photograph that we expected to find, we found one that was of the lady alone, alongside a letter addressed to Holmes. The photograph had been written upon. "I am married now. I hold no ill will toward you, and I will not use the photograph against you should you not attempt to be my undoing. Faithfully yours, Irene Adler." Holmes' client glanced over the photograph and smiled. She truly was a cunning woman. "Well, Holmes, I'll pay you. You've given me the assurance I need." I frowned. "We didn't retrieve the photograph. And you don't need to. She is a cunning woman, but one of her word. She won't try to harm me, and assurance was all that I sought. It really is a shame about her class. The gentry could use those such as she." Holmes, who had been gazing upon the photograph with that same rapt attention that he had given the real woman, interjected, "Yes, she really is in an entirely different class to you." His client, whom I had come to realize was not incredibly blessed in the art of subtlety, took no notice of the insult as Holmes handed the photo to him. "I don't need that." He held up his hand to the proffered photograph. "Keep it, a souvenir of this case. I've heard you like them." Holmes himself never disclosed the contents of the letter that had been addressed him. His client made some remarks about the lady's boastful nature as we parted ways, but neither of us were inclined to listen. Holmes did, however, seem almost angry. Once more we returned to his family home, and he went and disappeared. I ventured to ask Mary about it, and after explaining the situation to her, she gave me a simple, almost cryptic answer. "Oh, he's just pouting because he's been bested." "What do you mean?" "No one, save Mycroft, has ever been able to outthink Shirley since he was a child. From what you tell me, Miss Adler has quite the brain." "Has to have, since she managed to manipulate Shirley. Being an actress, I bet she saw through the makeup." I would later come to find out that she was right when I received a package from America addressed in that same script that Holmes' letter had been addressed in. Inside were several carefully wrapped balls of yarn, a crochet hook, and a pair of knitting needles, along with a letter. "Dearest Johanna, I can call you that, right? Oh, and do call me Irene in your letters. We are close enough for first names. I wanted to send you a little present to keep yourself busy. I remembered you mentioned that you love to make shawls, so I will be sure to keep you in materials. And don't fret, my dear. I knew from the beginning that Mr. Holmes was using you to get to me. I mean, my goodness, did he really think that he could fool a seasoned actress with that get-up? It's quite convincing, for an amateur, but an amateur I am not. I'm guessing he probably did not tell you what was in the letter. Typical man, but I'm certain he was frustrated, so I'll give him some grace. First, I told him where I really kept the photograph, in a lockbox at the bank. Did he really think me stupid enough to keep it at my own house? But I digress. Afterwards, I gave him quite the scolding, forcing you into a smoke-filled room. Really, what a bull-headed fool! Surely he knows that you suffered many gases on the front. He must, and still, put you in that horrid situation and forced me to play along with his little charade, losing precious seconds to get you out of the room. Still, you mustn't feel guilty about it. After all, as far as you knew, I would go to so far as to blackmail British nobility in the middle of a war. You cannot be blamed for trusting a man who ought to be looking after you. Though I do wish you had returned to the States with me, you would be in much gentler hands. Do you know I looked up Reverend Phelps just as soon as he requested I meet with his niece? No parish claimed him. You would think a man with the connections of the Holmes family would have thought to have some place validate his claim, though any moral ones would likely consider it sinful, I suppose. Do tell him to correct that the next time, won't you? I expect you to write to me often and to come visit me in California just as soon as you can return to the States. We will have such delicious fun. Your friend, Mrs. Stephen Thomas, i.e., Irene Adler. Despite her reassurances, I still felt guilty about the whole incident, although less so after receiving the wronged party's forgiveness. I thought for a while about Mary's words. Had the man really never been wrong? I tried to consider that position. He certainly was brilliant, as all of his family was, but to never be wrong? To always understand and have grasp of the situation? I concluded that Mary must have been making use of bold exaggeration. Even Holmes must learn. I made the decision to talk it over with him when he was no longer in a mood. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. I was in the sitting room. Mycroft had taken pity upon me after understanding the substance of the reading material that Mary had been subjecting me to, obtaining me several novels which fed the mind. I was pursuing one of these when I heard Holmes' footsteps come in. He hadn't addressed me, so I thought nothing of it. His hand landing upon my shoulder led me to realize that he sought my attention. Looking up at his face, I noted that he still seemed deep in thought. "Watson, I owe you an apology." "Me?" I was incredulous, thinking over the last few days, trying to remember what he could have done that would warrant an apology. "Yes, I failed to account for your recent history regarding the plan to find the photograph. I never considered that it may be taxing for you." He was gazing off into the distance, hand still on my shoulder. "Is that all? I accept your apology, I suppose, but really none is needed." That statement seemed to bring him into the moment, and he looked at me, gaze shifting from that of neutrality to one of concern. "I'm someone who needs to be useful, Holmes. The smoke didn't really bother me much. Sure, a few unpleasant memories came to mind, but it's a rather small price to pay to be of assistance to you." I gave him my brightest smile. I didn't smile often, so I hoped that it would reassure him and direct his attention away from my misuse of the truth. Holmes' face strained. For a moment he looked nearly angry, then sighed and gave a laugh. "I suppose you would consider it that way. In that case, I plan to make full use of you as long as you're here. Understand?" I caught on to his energy. "Understood. I'll patiently await your orders." I gave a British salute. He must have caught on to my amusement, because he actually grumbled. "Never surrendering in a war is not the accomplishment you Americans seem to think it is." "Dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I am not one to make regular use of profanity, but I will here. You are an absolute scoundrel! There! Now I can conduct myself with dignity. To think I used to be a fan of yours. Oh, don't be so surprised. With the circles I used to frequent, I know well the name Holmes, and the underworld reputation of one Sherlock Felix Augustus Holmes. Yes, I researched you quite a bit. Bet you never knew that, did you? I would have thought you would know better than to let just any maid be around when you spoke to your wealthy clients, but clearly you're not as observant as you think yourself to be, since you never realize that I am not so frivolous as to keep a document that could determine my safety anywhere but a bank's lockbox. I can forgive taking on the assignment of my spurned lover. Yes, I spurned him. I'm certain he told you that he told me he couldn't marry me due to my class. I can understand you taking up his cause. After all, you have a reputation to maintain among the nobility. I didn't mind. I only took the photograph to make him sweat a bit. Never intended to actually use it for anything unless he came after me. In fact, when I initially realized that you were on the case, I almost considered giving it up. If you were involved, then I knew my own safety was assured, you being an honorable man. So I thought it quite silly when you showed up to the theater as the Honorable Reverend Phelps, asking if your American niece could come to call. Yes, I saw you. I was the page you spoke to when arranging the visit. Your costume was quite good for an amateur, but any seasoned actor would be able to call you out in a second. I almost called you out right then, but I was curious if you would show up in a dress or hire a woman to act the part, so I agreed. How surprised I was when the most pitiful specimen of a war nurse walked in, though I was surprised to find out that she was really a surgeon. I figured she must be under the care of your dear brother, and you coerced her into assisting you. Still, some women are prone to agreeing to things. I could tell quite clearly that she could have been pushed around as easily as a feather blown by the wind. When she had a poor reaction to my sage, I decided to give you a second chance. If you took her home and saw that she was correctly cared for and told her not to try anything while visiting me, I resolved that I would give you the photograph. I was leaving England anyway, and it really was of no use to me any more. Then you pulled your little stunt. Do you know what was really in that safe, Mr. Holmes? A revolver that I keep around in case of scoundrels. Poor Dr. Watson has been subjected to the terrors of gas warfare, which you must know, and you sent her into a room you intended to fill with smoke. I wanted to shoot you dead that second. Still, I maintained my calm and remembered that getting the poor girl out of the room was far more important than killing her abuser. When she fell, I was terrified that the poor girl's heart had gave out in fright. Blessedly, she's from a hardier stock than that. But what if it had, Mr. Holmes? You would be responsible for the death of an innocent woman. Now, I know a stunted soul when I see one. To become a doctor by 25, the poor wretch must have spent her entire youth studying. I'm sure she gets some kind of excitement assisting you, but you owe her a thorough apology, and I will be asking her if you gave it. She has such potential, she should be allowed to fulfill it and live a happy life. That's all I want for anybody, you know, even that scoundrel who hired you. Well then, now that you thoroughly understand the gravity of the sin you have committed, I am going to give you a little advice. Though I knew who you were, I wanted to see how far you would take the charade that is Reverend Phelps, and made some inquiries. Next time you plan to masquerade as something so easy to trace as a minister, do make sure you have at least one parish that is willing to lie for you. It makes your story ever so much more convincing. That is all for now, my dear. Respectfully yours, Irene Adler. This has been A Scandal in Bohemia from The Mysterious Adventures of Dr. Watson, Book 1, The Great War, a Sherlock Holmes adaptation that's available on Amazon and Google Books.